Here we are. Good evening and welcome to the regular meeting of the Novi Community School District Board of Education. It is Thursday, September 27th. I would appreciate a roll call vote, Mr. Mena.
Trustee Cook. Here. Trustee Hood.
Here.
Trustee Mena here. Trustee Murphy.
Here.
Trustee O'Connor.
Here.
Trustee Smith.
Here.
Trustee Stevenson.
Here.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for being with us this evening. If you would all please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. First order on our agenda is the approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion.
I move that we support the approval of the agenda for tonight's meeting.
Moved by Mrs. Stevenson. Is there support for the approval of the agenda? Supported by Mrs. Hood. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. All right, just in time, Mr. Baker, this is your first opportunity for comments from the audience. This would be comments related to agenda items only at this time. If there is anyone that would like to speak, we would appreciate you identifying yourself and filling out a green card, but no one is going to the podium and they're not looking at me. So we will move on to our consent items. We have 2 consent items, regular meeting minutes. I would entertain a motion on our consent items. Mr. Mena?
Motion to approve consent items as presented.
Is there support?
Support.
It's been moved by Mr. Mena and supported by Mr. Smith to approve the consent items as presented. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same. Motion carries 7-0. Next are our action items. Our first is personnel recommendations. Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Our first is the personnel report, and I will turn to Dr. Kinzer.
Thank you. Tonight we just have one recommendation. It is a hire, a new hire. This is Emily Satterfield, a preschool teacher at the CEC.
I would entertain a motion. Thank you, Mr. Cook.
I move that we, the Novi Community School District Board of Education approves the personnel recommendations as presented.
Thank you.
Support.
So moved by Mr. Cook, supported by Mr. Mena. Any questions for Mr. Kinzer? This is a replacement, correct? For the teacher that we accepted a resignation last week?
Correct.
All right. Well, if there are no questions, I will call it the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Next on our agenda is the MASB call for delegates. Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. The Michigan Association of School Boards 2018 Delegate Assembly will begin Thursday, November 1st, 2018 at 7:30 p.m. in the Amway Grand Plaza Hotel in Grand Rapids. Delegates selected by boards of education across the state will decide MASB's positions on a wide variety of issues affecting education. All delegates and alternates must be school board members. Only delegates and alternates named by your board may offer motions and vote on issues. However, all school board members may speak on the issues and participate in the debate. Your 2018-19 MASB dues must be paid in order for the district to participate in the delegate assembly. All delegates must be certified by Friday, October 5th. A link to certify the official voting delegates and alternates who will represent your Board of Education has been sent to the Superintendent's Secretary. The naming of delegates and alternates by their respective boards will be presented for discussion, and we ask for a vote this evening. And so at our last meeting, Mr. O'Connor indicated that he could serve as a delegate because he will be at the meeting. And so you may have up to 4 delegates and up to 4 alternates.
All right. Is there anyone else that is planning on? Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
Yeah, I just want to let everybody know at the time, I wasn't sure what my schedule was. I am going to the conference. I'm one of the guest speakers at one of the breakout sessions, and that breakout session isn't scheduled until Saturday. But I still can go to the conference. That's not a problem. My only concern is that it's the same night as a school board meeting. So, pending what the agenda is on our school board meeting, that would take priority over.
We will only plan controversial issues that evening.
I'm sure you will.
Okay.
But I do plan on going there.
Okay. Is there anybody else that is planning on being out there? I mean, obviously we have to have at least 4 people here, so we can't have a lot of other people missing. But we could name someone else if somebody was considering that as well. All right, well, seeing none, oh, yes.
If it doesn't commit me to go for the whole time, then I'm happy to be included as a delegate.
Oh,
'Cause
okay.
I would be interested in going for a couple of things on.
Okay, fantastic. All right, so we will add Mrs. Hood to our recommendation so that you can participate if you're able to go that evening. Terrific. All right, so the recommendation is I would entertain a motion. Would someone would like to make that?
I move that the Novi Community School District Board of Education designates the following individuals to serve as delegates and alternates to the MASB 2018 Delegate Assembly, Dennis O'Connor and Kathy Hood.
All right. Is there-
Support.
Thank you. Been moved by Mrs. Stevenson and supported by Mr. Cook. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thank you for being willing to serve in that way, to serve our interests there. Next, we have our superintendent. I'm on the right page, yes. Superintendent Goals Report, Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. The superintendent and the Board of Education have agreed upon superintendent goals for the 2018-19 school year. These goals were thoroughly discussed during a number of board work sessions and came before the board for information and discussion at a regular meeting of the board on September 6th. The superintendent goals for 2018-19 comes to the board tonight for approval. You have a list of the goals, and I believe that the changes that we discussed at our last meeting have been made, and so they, I think, are accurate. Mr. O'Connor has, I sent to the board earlier this week on District Goal 3, which is on the fund balance, the goal is that the district will be fiscally responsible by maintaining a minimum 10% fund balance while striving to maintain low class sizes. The first goal under that is about our projected fund balance, and that it will exceed 10%, the goal that's established by the Board of Education. Mr. O'Connor has proposed an alternative that gives a little bit of range as opposed to what's listed in the goals currently. I sent that to the board earlier this week, and one of the significant changes is in the ineffective category at 5% 9 or lower, or 14.1% or higher. The ranges I think are kind of appreciated there, but the only concern would be on the 14.1% or higher, if that would lead to some artificial spending, perhaps. It would be the only concern. From my perspective, it wouldn't, but there is that possibility that could be inferred, or people would assume that we would spend down to keep it under the 14.1%. So I don't know if Mr. O'Connor has additional comments.
Yeah, actually, that is a concern. That's a hole in the concept, if you will. But if there were to be additional spending, I would assume that any budget amendments would come into the board, so there's a check and balance on you and your evaluation. So I think we're covered that way.
Okay.
And if we decide as a board, to not do that spending, then, I don't think we would do that. But the point is the check and balance is in place.
All right. Since we really haven't had an opportunity to discuss it, we'll discuss it before we have a motion, if that's okay, so that the motion can be accurate and reflect what the board, comes to the conclusion on. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I like the concept. It kind of aligns it with the conditional growth index scoring that they do. The thing is, if there is such a glut in the balance, the fund balance, that is going to come because we have a extremely high growth in enrollment, and I would assume that we would be hiring teachers to keep our class sizes down. So that would, along with the checks and balances that the board would, be looking at any budget amendments that would have to come along at that time too. So I do like the concept, and I think it is a good idea.
Okay.
I've got some concerns about it. When we look at the highly effective between 9.5% and 10.5%, that's a 1% swing, and so that's $735,000 in the whole scheme of things, and that's a pretty thin needle to, or whatever that euphemism would be, needle to thread. And especially since I'm on the budget committee and I looked at all our budget stuff from last year, our original expenditure budget was $75.9 million, and our final budget expenditure was $77.4. So that is so that's $1.6 million more than we originally budgeted for, just in the expenses, and that's what our fund balance is based on, 10% of expenditures. So it just seems to put too much wobble in the target for fund balance, given the variables that go into the expenditure. I'm just concerned about. I mean, if Dr. Matthews is fine with it, and effective versus highly effective isn't a big deal, I just think 1% in the highly effective is a pretty narrow target, given the amount of variables in
So
there.
you'd like to see that range just be a little bit
Yeah,
higher?
maybe.
Did you
Or-
want to see this?
Let's see.
Just this one.
I would concur. It's a narrow target, and in all likelihood, I would be rated effective versus highly effective in that category, because fund balance is notoriously tricky, based on enrollment, based on expenses. When you evaluate me, the audit hasn't been completed, and so there's a lot of variables in there. I feel fairly confident that that we could hit the effective target, which would be up to 12%. But even that, there is the tendency would be increased to want to spend money, to come before the board to spend money to get it within those ranges. And so, as Mr. O'Connor suggested, that is the one flaw. The check, obviously, is the board, but a piece of that is, enrollment and we have hired teachers. The kind of the tricky part of that is that kids don't come in kind of neat bundles of 25 or 10 or 5. Often you have one additional fourth grader, 2 additional third graders, and so it doesn't justify hiring teachers necessarily. And so those are the tricky pieces of that. The way we currently have it is a simpler way. Fund balance over 10%, between 8 and 9.9 is effective. That's a simpler, cleaner way to do it. I understand kind of the objective that Mr. O'Connor is suggesting, but I would also agree that at times those kind of targets would create incentive to spend money when you may not have to.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add, one more piece of math to look at. So I took last year's actuals. We were at 12.4% fund balance, and if Dr. Matthews had been incented to spend down, he would have had to quickly spend $1.46 million. And it kind of goes back to, does that set the wrong incentive?
That's a good question. Mr. O'Connor.
I think anytime we have a chance to put more money in the classroom, when education is always, under siege in Lansing, and there's never enough funding in Lansing, okay, if we're at over 12%, let's hope our administration is creative enough to come up with an educational program that's going to be in the best interest of our kids, and put that money back into the classroom to help our kids.
And I would, sorry.
Isn't that an interesting argument?
I was just going to ask Ms. Minnick perhaps weigh in. I mean, this is the business office, and you know what your numbers are and all of that. And what do you kind of see in that I mean, anything that we're not seeing, maybe would be a challenge or a concern?
Yes, thank you. I would offer 2 points for consideration. One is in the case of an extraordinary item, perhaps things that don't happen all the time but might be extraordinary, such as a state aid proration. Or let's say we sell a piece of an asset at the end of the school year, or something that might cause our expenditures to increase or our revenues to suddenly decrease or increase or what have you. Those can have impactful results on fund balances. The second thing I might offer is that when you have a top-end cap, that might conflict with some long-term planning that the board may want to do at some point. Where you might, if there's something that you have some planned expenditures over the next coming years, you might not want to cap your fund balance. You might want to build up fund balance for a particular expenditure. Just 2 thoughts, long-term planning and extraordinary items.
Okay. Good points. Yes, Mr. Smith.
That's a good point. The last point you brought up, is there a history of that?
Yes.
So we build up our savings, if you will, because we know we've got a big expense coming up in 2 years.
Well, I don't know if there's a buildup, but when I first started in the district 8 years ago, the fund balance was approximately 17%. My first year, we spent it down to just over 10% by decreasing class sizes. The high school had, we're just coming off of the recession. The board had made some significant cuts, had made some agreements with the union that we would increase class sizes at the high school. They were up, some classes were 36, 38 students at the high school. When I came in, we made the decision that we were going to really focus on class sizes, and so we spent that 17% down to 10% fairly quickly over my first year in the district. And so, one of the thoughts I have on this issue is this year or the past couple of years, we've been able to add, social workers at every building. We've been able to add math interventionists K through 12, and we've been able to do that because as we look at the budget in February, March, April for the following year, we've been able to see that we have a fund balance that is X, and we're able to spend some money and we are able to maintain the fund balance over 10%. But use those extra funds to support classroom interventions or classroom building interventions for the next school year. And then we draw down that fund balance based on our read of the budget as we go through the budget process in the spring.
All right. Mr. O'Connor.
So I have a little different perspective on historically what we've done. This board, at least in the 10 years that I've been on board, has never built up its fund balance to pay for things in the future. If anything, we've always gone out for bonds for any kind of capital expenditure, and we thank Kevin's for the support of the community. We've been able to keep our operating expenses at that 10% fund balance. When Dr. Matthews came in, we were up at 17%, quite frankly, because we had a financial integrity problem, with our old administration. And when we saw that we came in at 17%, this board immediately said, hey, we're committed to 10%, let's lower those class sizes. And that's what we did. In terms of, the extraordinary things that may happen, that does happen in any kind of budget cycle, but that would affect Dr. Matthews' rating as well, even under this old scale, if something extraordinary happened. I mean, we could put a clause in there if the board isn't comfortable that says, barring any, tornadoes or $1 million floods or something like that. But if something extraordinary happens that lowers the fund balance, even under this old method, that's going to hurt Dr. Matthews.
Are you taking a breath because we were going to start to talk?
Oh, I wasn't going to talk
okay.
unless I got the hammer.
The plus or minus 0.5% on the highly effective and all that. That I'm sure we could open that up, because it is only roughly $750,000. That could be opened up to the highly effective. But I guess I look at the ranking here, and just by doing what you're doing, you should get a 3. And if you are really diligent on it, you're right at 10% within a small margin, and that's a stretch objective, which should be a 4. That's, I guess I look at them that way. So doing your job is effective, going above and beyond, and hitting a harder target is highly effective.
Other board members that maybe haven't weighed in? Want to weigh in?
Like me?
You or Tracy? You have a sense of, I mean, I do kind of agree that maybe broadening that highly effective a little bit wouldn't be a bad idea, just tweaking the numbers a little bit. I mean, I'm not opposed to it in theory at all. I think that it does, I mean, I don't know what message it sends. I mean, I don't know about that. I think it definitely sends a message. We're committed to 10%, and we want to spend money in classrooms, which I appreciate that's kind of Mr. O'Connor's intent, is that if we have that much money, we should be doing something maybe in our classrooms. We haven't engaged in strategic planning yet. We haven't done that in quite some time, and I don't think. I mean, I've been on the board 11 years. We've never done it. I mean, we did some vision setting, but we didn't do a strategic plan like I think they did in the past at some point. So I don't know whether that even changes anything. So, and it certainly wouldn't change anything for next year. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Just to clarify, because I'm the new guy still, am I correct in an assumption that there was significant study that went into establishing 10% as the number?
10% really is kind of the low threshold where the district does not have to borrow over the summer because we don't get state aid payments in September. So from the state aid payment in August to the state aid payment in October, we have to have enough money in the bank to pay employees, open schools, turn on the lights, all those kinds of things. And if it's lower than 10%, many districts in the state go out to borrow, and then they have to pay interest on what they borrow with their first, when their state aid payments start. And so that's why we've established that 10% threshold.
I do understand that. So but it's established as a number, not a range. It's not 10 to 12. It's 10%, right?
Yes.
Then I guess I would also agree directionally with Trustee Cook's mindset of being effective is good. Being highly effective should be harder. So I'm okay with if we want to make it a little bit wider, that's fine. But directionally speaking, I agree that highly effective means you nailed it.
Yeah. Mr. O'Connor?
Historically and directionally speaking, regardless of who sat at this board, it's the one thing that all 7 of us have always agreed on. I know that's hard to believe,
and me.
But we literally, every board has gone through this. When we first started, when Dr. Matthews came on board, and we went through a visioning process in terms of what our 4 district goals were, and we all agreed to that, and we all said it was low. I mean, even Ms. Minnick has said, in terms of basic standards, it should be 15. But we as a board said we're not going to borrow money, so we're not going to go down to 8.5%. But we are not going to go up to 15, even though that is the best practice, because we want to put as much money in the classroom as possible, even if it hurt our bond rating. And it has hurt our bond rating. And yet that's what we did, because we had faith in the community to support us with bonds, with capital expenditures, so that we could operate, at that 10% to put as much money into the classroom as possible.
Yes, Mr. Mena.
Okay, my turn. So I do like the concept here. I'm up for adjusting the spreads on these things. My only concern is if we were to end up with a glut of money at the end of the year where we hit 15%, is that necessarily a bad thing? Some may think so, but is it that bad that we have to give a minimally effective? I'm not so sure. That's really my only concern. Other than that, I support this whole concept. The only concern I have is having that 14.1% in the ineffective area. I would probably look to move it up a slot or two.
But then if I can offer
revised
a thought, I would take what Mr. O'Connor has suggested. I think Mr. Cook is appropriate in suggesting that effective is meeting the target, highly effective is kind of going beyond that, and and doing something extraordinary. That's what highly effective suggests. And so I could revise some of those numbers, tweak it a little bit. We would not vote on the goals tonight. We would vote on them next week, and then I would get that information out to the board tomorrow for kind of some thought over the weekend. If there's some suggestions that could come my way, to modify it even after I give you suggestions, we could include those in Monday information to the board and get those in so that the board would have time to consider it, and the goals could be an action item next week.
Is the board, yes,
Can I just ask one quick question then? Where did the plus or minus 0.5% for highly effective and the ranges actually, where did they actually come from? The theory would be that you start out and you go based off of history and standard deviation off of what we typically ended up with. So I'm just curious.
It was a suggestion on my part.
Okay.
I am a math major, but
they started
I
out
don't
as an
know standard deviations.
they started out as an arbitrary number, basically, is what you're saying.
So one of the things I could do is work with Ms. Minnick to look historically what our range has been over the past several years, and then we could use those numbers to kind of provide some suggestions for the board, and then the board could vote on this the package next week.
Just one last question, Ms. Minnick. Where does the 15% as a best practice come from?
That's been established by the Michigan School Business officials.
Seems interesting that we take a lot of what they say as stuff we really should do, and there's some that we don't. So, but it's for MASB?
MSBO.
MSBO.
Association of
Michigan School Business Officials.
Okay, that helps. Thank you.
So we will work on that. I'll get some information to the board tomorrow, and then we can bring this back as an action item next week.
Okay, so we will vote on our superintendent goals at the October 4th meeting, which is next Thursday.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, if there's nothing further on that, we are to our policy manual. Dr. Matthews.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. From January 2017 through June 2018.
I'm sorry, just a second. Is there something else, Mr. O'Connor? You sure?
I was asking if the MSBO was an office that was for everyone that had a position such as Ms. Minnick.
Oh.
And he said, yep, that's what that's for, and there's an office for curriculum and an office for HR. So he's just...
Fantastic. Yeah, I mean, that's a good explanation, because we kind of forget that not everybody knows that.
MSBO
So.
was...
Yeah.
So.
Good questions. Okay.
From January 2017 through June 2018, the Governance and Policy Committee, cabinet members, and Kevin Sutton of Lusk Albertson met several times and covered every policy that's currently in place to ensure that new policies stated the intent of the board. On September 13, 2018, the Committee of the Whole met with Mr. Sutton and went through the new proposed policy manual. The new proposed policy manual is coming before the board for information and discussion tonight, and will come back to the board for action on October 4th. There's a list of new policies that Mr. Sutton has provided for you, the policy and the topic. And then in addition to these policies, the board needs to take action on the following policy changes. 1001, organization and functioning of the board. Proposed policy on board compensation. Board member, the current proposed language is that board members may be paid a stipend as determined annually by the board for attendance at each meeting of the board, including committee meetings and board study sessions. One of the options that was proposed was board members will receive not more than $30 per meeting up to a total of not more than 52 meetings, including committee meetings, as compensation for their service. The recommendation that we propose this evening is that the Novi Community School District approve the following language on compensation. Board members may be paid a stipend as determined annually by the board for attendance at each meeting of the board, including committee meetings and board study sessions.
Okay, so let's before we move on, if that's okay, we'll have our discussion about that before we move to the next one, and then because this won't come back for action until the next meeting. I know that
Correct.
there needs to be revisions to what our recommendation is based on that. That will happen. And I know you didn't get to be here, so
Yeah, that's
I will
why
call
I
on
thought.
you first.
Thank you. I wasn't here last meeting. Sorry about that.
That's
but,
okay.
And I may have mentioned some of my concerns around this whole redoing of policies before, but it might be worth reiterating. When we first discussed making a change to our policy book at the board table, I was led to believe that we were going to bring in Les Galberson in order to streamline our policies, and I felt that that was a worthy goal. And at no time during that period when we brought them in for the presentation and when we made the decision, did we discuss making any substantive changes to any of the policies we had. Had I known that, I would have been concerned and may not have supported the initiative. So you may ask why? Well, because I was concerned that we would hit policies that would lead to major debates during committee meetings, and specifically on those policies where there would be debates on where the line of delineation for responsibilities would be between boards and administration. I felt that those type of discussions should basically happen at the board table. And that did happen on a number of occasions, and that's basically why we have the options in front of us. When we did have a discussion and a debate on a particular policy, not surprisingly, I was on an island on myself with regards to those particular issues. So why is that the case? Well, I have a strong opinion on the responsibilities of a school board. I feel strongly that school boards have oversight responsibilities, and they're ultimately responsible for things like the curriculum being taught in the district. And that's just not me speaking. That's the Michigan Association of School Board, who many here hold in high esteem. They agree with that concept as well. It's right on their website. So here I am as a board member, meeting after meeting after meeting, trying to do my oversight work, while having to debate with other board members who feel the need to abdicate this responsibility to administration.
Mr. Amena, I appreciate the comments, but this is where we're at now.
Correct, and I'm going to finish my comments. I mean, I think it's part of the discussion here. So in essence, there are some policies before us that we're going to discuss, and most of the ones that are options are issues that we debated on with regards to whether or not boards should have responsibilities for the type of things that are under discussion. And what I wanted to say was, I strongly suggest that my fellow board members, before we do vote, really take a good look at all of the policies that we made changes for. The only ones that we have options for are the ones that I brought up, that I decided were ones that really need to be discussed and voted on by the whole board. There may be others there that maybe I just got tired after a long evening of meetings to debate and just let slide. So again, this policy that we have before us, some of these policies we have before us, and we'll certainly go into more detail when we get into the specific one about curriculum, is one that I'm still a little perplexed about why we're trying to abdicate our responsibilities to administration. So that's all I have right now.
Okay, so if we can go back to 1001 and discuss the language in that particular proposed policy changes. Mr. O'Connor.
I would like to comment on what Mr. Mena said. Not only do I agree with what he said, but I find this whole process extremely bizarre and contradictory in the sense that we're looking at 5 or 6 different policies here that are changing because basically we have a new vendor. And yet, when it came to a new nepotism policy, certainly Les Galberson had a different nepotism policy than we had, and yet, rightfully so, we put in our original nepotism policy because this board debated that 6 months ago, and we all agreed on that policy, and that's why we were keeping that policy in and not listening to Les Galberson as part of a recommendation. So the fact that we're even talking about these blows my mind. But secondly, and this is what's even more disturbing to echo what Mr. Mena said, every one of these policies that we're going to debate in the next 15, 20 minutes, except for the first one, says that the board will lose any kind of decision-making authority versus what it had before. And I just don't think that's right.
Okay. We are going to go back and discuss 1001. I will just say before we begin that the board as a whole voted to move forward with this. We did look at every policy. That is not the only, the nepotism policy is not the only policy that we inserted our own language in. There were several other policies that we inserted language in that we had in our existing policies. We did discuss each one of them. We had each one of our administrators there to discuss how different policies would impact favorably, disfavorably, gave us, I know Ms. Minnick went through the business portion of it very thoroughly and made some suggestions of things that she thought would add value and functionability to our policies, and some things that we actually hadn't thought of, which was very valuable to have them all there. We did spend a lot of time on this. As Mr. Mena said, there were some late nights for sure. This board has had these policies for about 6 weeks now to look them over, and given our practice of submitting any kinds of questions, that's why we had the committee of the whole, so that if there were additional ones that we needed looked at, it could be done at that time. To my understanding, these are the ones that have risen to the top of needing additional discussion. If there were others that board members didn't read through or didn't submit, I don't know that we, at this point, if your suggestion is going back and looking through them all again.
No, my suggestion is I'm just letting other board members know, right, that you know the reasons these are in front of you were because I made them an issue for the most part. Okay, what I'm saying is if you're not looking at other policies because maybe you felt that I looked at these all deeply, don't necessarily count on that. We were there late nights some nights, and it would get pretty tiring and would be hard to follow. All I'm saying is you on your own should take a look and do the comparisons and see if you may find others that you might have some issues with.
So, and I would reiterate that I have confidence that this board, in the last month and a half that they've had, given some of the feedback on different things, it seems to me like this is a board that thoroughly has looked through it. And if I'm wrong about that, that would be disappointing, certainly. But this is a board that has tended to look through things very seriously and propose and send questions, which was why Mr. Albertson was here with us for the evening the other week. Mr. Smith.
As a point of clarification, Mr. Mena, are you saying during the committee work is when you brought up these issues, and that's why we're seeing a couple
Correct.
different choices?
Those are why these are up for vote right now, because
we're up for discussion, right?
Right, because if I may,
we just couldn't come to conclusion
we couldn't come to conclusion, and finally we came up with this as a method. I guess maybe I made enough stink during a policy meeting that at one time one of the members of our policy meeting got up and left because they had to compose themselves. They were so angry at me. But these were the ones where...
I'm sorry. What was that? I don't remember that.
Sure, that was our attorney who got up and left because he was upset. What ended up happening was we finally ended up coming up with this method, and that's why we were able to smooth through the rest of the committee meetings. We just decided, okay, where we had a disagreement, we'll just put the options up there and let the board decide.
And the committee was you?
Initially, it was Mrs. Glebzinski, myself, and Mr. Mena, and then when Mrs. Glebzinski left, Mrs. Hood stepped in and took her position.
Plus the attorney, and at some times, many of the cabinet members as well.
I know you're trying to get our attention back to the first issue. If I can ask, since we're talking about the work that you guys did in the committee, was there discussion at some point during the committee meetings to think of the right way to phrase it, to remove some of the discretion that the board held because similar to a comment that Mr. O'Connor made, it appears that the things that we're discussing tonight, with the exception of the whether we get paid or not, all focus around the board relinquishing some ability or making it more difficult for the board to bring an issue to a special meeting, for example, 3 people, not 2. So I just don't know if that came up while you were talking.
Some of it did came up, and some of it was based on the attorney's experience in litigating cases, that he gave us language that he felt were best practices based on his litigation experience. I would say that the first 2 that we're discussing tonight don't have anything to do with that. Certainly, the curriculum development is one. Matters related to employment, the behavior one, which was the suspension one. And that is something that we do need to discuss because some of that did come before us. So it is right.
Last week?
Yes, and it is right and just that we would review them as a board, and certainly if there were other ones during the mix of that, as we went through them, even with Mr. Sutton at the committee of the whole, these were the ones that rose to the top as well. Yes, Mr. O'Connor.
But just to clarify, some of these policies that we've had in place for 10, 15, 20 years were because Neola thought they were best practice as well. Correct?
Well, a lot of what Neola had was they quote the law throughout theirs. They have reiterations of the law, and they did have a lot of things that they put in to our things. What we discovered as we were going through the policy is that there were many things in there that we either have never done or don't do that we did remove. We don't have a safe deposit box. We don't, there were things that needed to be removed because we haven't done them both either in theory or in practice for practical reasons. And certainly chime in on this if your recollection. I mean, many of you were at that meeting, but so I know Neola was here. We decided to go in this direction. We felt that it would be better, more user-friendly. Also, we had not really reviewed that policy manual. I don't think in its entirety since I came on the board in 2000, like 10 years ago. So, and the best practice is to touch your policies or do some review of them fairly periodically so that you are kind of adhering and making sure that it's still functioning, and if there's changes, whether it's in the community or whatever, that then you're looking at your policies on a somewhat regular basis. We could not do that with our old policy manual. It was very cumbersome. So does that answer your question?
One other thing that I wanted to bring up, I had a question. I know during the committee meeting, I don't know if it got in, and maybe it did, so you can maybe clear it up. We went in one direction, so we went from our policies and try to map each and every one to a policy in the Lusk-Alberson template that they had. What I don't know was ever answered was whether or not there was any policies on the Lusk template that didn't necessarily map back to a policy.
Those were the new ones.
So those are the listed as the new policies.
Those are these.
So that's what that means.
Correct.
Mm-hmm. And I believe that there were 2 that were added since our policy committee met.
That Lusk-Alberson, like Neola, provides updates to policies based on either new legislation or new events. For example, the electronic cigarettes, vape.
Right.
That's a new one.
What was this summer? They put out an update to their policy manual. This would have been, if we would have had Lusk-Alberson, a policy that would have come before the board as an update for the board, and that's why that policy is listed there.
Yes.
I'm crystal clear on the Lusk-Alberson. That obviously they were represented.
Yes.
Help me. What's Neola?
Neola, I don't know what that's.
Neola is.
It's another policy provider.
It's another policy provider. They provide
so it's
policies.
Similar to Lusk-Alberson?
Yep. Except they're not a law firm. They consult with a law firm in the state of Michigan, but they provide Board of Education policies in several states. Typically, what they will do is that they will give boards options, and then the board will select the option that they choose.
Best suited for them and their
Correct.
opinion. Okay.
They're a competitive vendor, and they had Neola forever, and we switched to this one last July.
Okay.
Okay. So organizing and functioning of the board. The language that is currently being proposed that the board members may be paid a stipend as determined annually by the board for attendance at each meeting of the board, including committee meetings and board study sessions. So this would be talked about and determined each year by whatever board is sitting at that point in time. So I know we talked about it at the committee of the whole a little bit. Is there additional discussion?
Sure.
Yes.
I wasn't here that day, but I won't be supporting, well, at least I would be supporting the second option. I think I talked about this ad nauseum at a previous meeting. While nobody has taken advantage of getting paid $30 per meeting in many, many years, I think that option should be there. We may have a board member someday who may want to get paid. Maybe they have a need to get paid for meetings. I don't think, unless Ms. Minnick tells me otherwise, that's going to cause a huge financial burden on the district. They can, in the beginning of the year, just let administration know whether they can get payment for meetings or not. And then if there's folks here who are in a different financial situation and don't feel like they want to take pay, then just don't do it and leave it optional.
As I read the option, it says the board members will receive not more than $30 per meeting, and as it's written, it to me that indicates that we will write a check to each board member for the meetings. The board member at that point can decide what they're going to do with it, but
it does say not more than, so you'd have to have some discussion about what it's supposed to be.
Correct, but the way it's written, that option is that board members will receive, and so we would, per the policy, write a check at whatever number the board identifies, and then the board member would have the ability to designate that in any way that they want it, as I read that.
Yeah.
Well, that's our current language, which is what we had. There was a lot of discussion on what does that exactly mean.
Yeah, and I would be up for modifying that to make it optional, as I mentioned. Otherwise, you're right, that is the current policy. So does that mean that you're going to start cutting us all checks for all the time we've been on the board?
No, because the way I read this, we're not going to receive more than 30, and everybody's receiving 0. That's not more than 30.
Right.
Yeah.
So the language is fine.
But we can clarify it to say it's optional at the discretion of board members and leave it at that.
I think the discussion that
I thought we had that discussion at the last board meeting, and that we said that we would it was all or nothing. We would act as one unit, and we wouldn't give one person's going to get paid, one person's not going to receive a stipend. I like the fact that we should all be uniform and consistent with what we're going to do.
Mr.
I said that's what I recall. I know you weren't here, Mr. Mena, but the discussion, and although it was minor from a budgeting standpoint, was it might be difficult if 2 out of 7 board members wanted compensation, and one was okay with $10 and another wanted $30. So at least at the last meeting, whether it's correct or not, the consensus was, well, either we'll all agree to not get paid, or we'll all agree to get $20 a meeting, or whatever we decide on an annual basis.
And I think the other piece of that is in total transparency, that it would need to be discussed, and board members would have to declare what their intent is at every meeting. So there was some discussion around that too, if the language chooses. I'm certainly, yes, Mr. Cook, excuse me.
Finish your statement.
No, that's okay.
Well, the two are very similar. One just puts a cap on it. Okay? Mm-hmm. The first option is that they may be paid a stipend as determined annually by the board. The other one is shall receive no more than $30 per meeting, up to 52 meetings, including committee meetings. And it seems to me like if we take the two and combine them, we might end up with a little more robust, and we'd be reviewing it every year also.
So you would like it to state board members may be paid a stipend of not more than $30 per meeting, up to a total of not more than 52 meetings, as determined annually by the board for attendance, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
It still gets you discussing it each year and making a decision of the board each year. I don't have a problem with that.
I support that.
That's fine.
Good job.
So, did you get that, Mrs. Holly, or should I write that down?
We will listen to make sure we have the thing.
Okay, well, okay.
Okay.
Trustee Miller, your thoughts on that? Or?
No, I think it's a good idea.
Okay. Whew, we're through 1001. Now we're to 1002, meetings of the Board of Education. We had a lot of discussion about this last time, too. I'll let you do the reading, Mr.
The
Dr.
proposed
Matthews.
policy this is on special meetings. The current proposed language is that special meetings of the board may be called by the president or any 3 board members by providing not less than 24 hours notice to all board members. The notice to board members and the public shall be consistent in manner and form with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. An option is that special meetings of the board may be called by the president or by any 2 members of the board, provided there is compliance with the notice provision of these bylaws. Special meetings of the board may be called by the president on 3 days' notice to each trustee given by mail, email, or telephone.
Right, and the recommended language is the first one, which is may be called by president or any 3 board members, providing not less than 24 hours notice to all board members. Mr. Cook?
Again, they're very similar. The discrepancy between the two is 2 versus 3.
And the 24 hours versus 3 days notice. That's another.
24-hour notice, 24-hour notice.
3-day notice and option.
Option 2 has 3 days notice to each trustee.
And may be called by the president on a 24-hour notice to each trustee. So,
where are you reading that?
Days.
Option number 2, special meetings of the board may be called by the president or by any 2 board members of the board, provided there is compliance with this notice provision of these bylaws. Special meetings of the board may be called by the president on 24-hour notice to
It
each
says 3
trustee.
days' notice.
Oh, you're reading the recommendation.
Oh, right.
I'm reading
The recommendation.
I'm reading right out of the bylaws. Page 10 of 45.
Oh, you.
I'm reading right out of what they gave us.
Current policy or the bylaw?
The policy that they're proposing, highlighted.
Oh, the recommend. Oh, okay, I got you. I'm tracking now. I apologize.
Okay.
Discrepancy between the 2?
Yeah, they're recommending something that's not option 1 or 2. It's a combination, kind of, right? Is that correct?
What he has in the policy manual that is provided to us, they both say 24 hours.
Okay.
There's no mention of a 3-day notice.
Okay.
We're looking at the agenda that we have, and that's what it shows.
I am looking at the supplement to the agenda,
But I'm just
which
saying
is the
what we're
policy.
looking at. Not a problem.
Okay.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor?
So this is one specifically where I asked the representative from Les Galverson, where did you come up with yours versus the other one? And he specifically said, this is what we think versus this is what Neola thinks. And to me, we've had it this way for a long period of time. It's making it more difficult for board members to call a special board meeting. If it's ain't broke, don't change it. Why are we changing it? Just because we have a new vendor? That makes no sense to me.
Well, I don't know that it's just because we have a new vendor as opposed to listening to, I mean, just because we've had something for a long time a certain way doesn't necessarily mean it's the best way. So I think it's just looking at it a different way and saying it doesn't make sense. We also just adopted a board operating procedure that says 2 board members can get something on an agenda. So how is that different from a special meeting? If it's still 2 board members, why do they not just ask to have it put on an agenda as opposed to calling a meeting and getting us all together? To me, it should be a different threshold, but that's just my opinion. Is there somebody else, Mr. Cook?
Well, I wasn't finished, but
I apologize.
To me, reading from the manual here, there's special meetings as long as it complies with the OMA, as long as it's in compliance with the OMA, 24 hours notice, and using the two board members versus the 3 that we currently have, the two that we currently have versus the 3 that's recommended, then I don't see an issue with it. But it's all got to comply with the Open Meetings Act.
Right, so definitely that.
Rather than these bylaws.
Okay. Other board members have strong feelings about 2 versus 3 board members? The 24-hour notice, I think, is something that we kind of all agreed to last time that would be a part. Yes.
I'll just chime in. I said the same thing at the last meeting. I think adding something to the agenda requires 2, and just on principle, I think calling a special meeting should require more than 2 board members for everybody to come here. I think Board of Education meetings have some importance, and it should, on principle, it makes sense to me to have 3 members request it, but it's not a big deal.
So where does everybody stand with it? 2 or 3? Go ahead, Mr. 2.
2.
3.
3.
Surprise.
I
I say 2.
Okay. Okay, so the language in of the final recommendation, and let me just read I'm going to read what I have here. Mr. Cook, follow along with yours really closely. So that it says that special meetings of the board may be called by the president or any 2 board members by providing not less than 24-hour notice to all board members. The notice to board members and the public shall be consistent in manner and form with the requirements of the Open Meetings Act. Right? Okay. So.
Can I ask one clarifying question? How many times in the last 5 years has a special meeting been called?
Once, twice for.
This way?
Well,
Like
for
2 board members?
hiring purposes.
Well, I know we do an emergency one like we just did, but I'm just wondering how many times have 2 people?
0.
0. Okay, so I think we can.
Okay, we can move on. Thank you. 2006 is behavior. This is a proposed policy on long-term suspensions and expulsions. The current proposed I'll let you read.
Current proposed language. The Board of Education delegates to the superintendent the authority to issue long-term suspensions and expulsions pursuant to legally compliant procedures set forth in the Student Code of Conduct. The superintendent's decision on such suspensions and expulsions will be final. The option is the superintendent's decision on such suspensions and expulsions can be appealed to the Board of Education.
Okay, so this is one where there are, just to clarify, there are certain situations that are mandatory suspensions or expulsions
Correct.
that would not necessarily be appealable, correct?
Correct.
Because by
even,
law,
there are mandatory suspensions and expulsions that are technically said to be permanent, but the law provides an appeal after 180 school days. So they're not technically permanent. A person could appeal in 180 days.
and that doesn't change based on this.
Correct.
So just to clarify that, yes, Mr. O'Connor.
So why wouldn't we allow the people that vote for us be able to appeal to us?
From an administrative point of view, the administrators have worked with the students, understand the situation in the building, have perspective and context that is difficult to communicate in a disciplinary hearing, and so from our perspective, it provides what we believe is the appropriate decision-making authority to the administrative team that you have put in place to make decisions on suspensions and expulsions.
Okay. Mr. O'Connor.
Before you got here, we did this all the time. Before you got here.
Mm-hmm.
Throughout the last decade.
Yep. And I've almost every district I've been in, the suspensions and expulsions have stopped at the superintendent's level.
Yes.
I didn't get a chance to ask you, Dr. Matthews, is that your preference?
I believe that's the appropriate policy.
But Mr. O'Connor is correct. That is something that we were involved in, suspensions and expulsions, for a long time. I will say that, when you know one of the students that could potentially be involved, that's a tricky thing, right?
Would that board member then recuse themselves from?
You cannot.
You cannot.
So I could see this, I do think that it is difficult in those situations to know who to call in, and there's a lot of evidence to look at that's provided to us. Typically, the administrators are here.
One other point, since there is a history of this happening with the board, what percentage of the cases were ever reversed against what the superintendent had stated?
Maybe we had quite a few one year.
Really? What's quite a few?
Maybe 30%.
Well, you know what? I will say,
maybe
though,
20, 25, 30%.
actually, Dennis, it used to come to us, and we used to be able to. We actually used to say, well, these are what our options are. We didn't have a at that point in time, and Dr. Matthews wasn't here. We didn't have a superintendent say that this is what you must do. This is your recommendation, and we'd say, well, what are our options, and then we would weigh it out. But
correct.
but I don't know,
I don't know, maybe 20%, 25%. There were times where we
yeah.
didn't take the recommendation. Not
Or
a lot.
or we altered the recommendation.
But this
Or we
is
alter-
different.
yes,
This is
or
where
we
the
alter the
superintendent's
recommendation.
going to make a decision.
Yes.
No, the same process, and then it came to the board for appeal.
Oh, okay.
Right.
No, it sounds
There
like
were,
this
there
is
were
different.
some that came to us
Right, but-
before appealing, right?
No,
No,
the
no.
superintendent
Those
can
were
make
all
the
the
decision,
appeal.
and then
Okay.
at that
So
point,
then
the
the-
family has the old
Right.
policy, the family had the right to
Okay,
appeal
I
to the board.
apologize.
So, no, but you're right, we had options. We could either agree with the superintendent's recommendation, we could not agree with the superintendent's recommendation, or sometimes there was a third option. You could do this or that, depending on the specific case. So you're absolutely correct, there were three options. And there were times where we did not agree with the superintendent.
And I think part of this language has changed, and correct me if I'm wrong, in part because there's new laws that determine like all the steps you have to go through before you can even get to a point of suspension or expulsion.
There are 7 factors that the law now identifies that you have to consider before you make decisions on suspensions and expulsions. And so those are factors that administrators are familiar with, have been trained in. So it from our perspective, it makes sense because we have that new state law on suspensions and expulsions, that it would be the decision of the administrators and the superintendent. The new state law, the preference of the new state law is that you look to reduce suspensions and expulsions. And so that's why those factors have been included in discussions about suspensions and expulsions. And so we've had training from Troon, we've had training from MASA, from MASSP, from MASSP is the Michigan Association of Secondary School Principals. We've had training with the Michigan Elementary and Middle School Principals Association. So we believe that we're in a position to appropriately make decisions on these cases. And so that's why the recommendation comes to you in this form.
All right, so where do board members stand in terms of?
If we're going to bring it up next meeting, why aren't we just going to have the discussion on which way we're going to go then? I'm just wondering why we're polling.
Because we're putting a recommendation together, the appropriate recommendation together, so that when it comes back for us, that the recommendation is just like we do. It's information discussion is what it is right now. So it's to get an idea of based on the conversation and what you've heard.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I was probably the person that caused it to be on here because I felt that we should stay status quo.
Well, I think this is one of them that I think this is one of the ones that after you're like, you know what, let's just put this on to discuss because this is you said we started looking at it like if there's substantive changes. I could be wrong about that, but I think this is one of those. Mr. Cook.
I guess I like the idea of the appeal as a checks and balance type situation, so that we don't end up, not that Dr. Matthews would do it, but, running with supreme authority and running rampant. The laws would prevent that, but I would expect if there was an appeal, he would lay out his case based on the law and the facts and all that, and that's what we would make our decision on.
And if I just a couple things I want to add. We haven't had any suspensions since I've been on this board.
No.
Okay, so don't expect that that's going to change. If we did have one, then the chances of that person appealing would probably be less than 100%, right? So I mean, we're talking about a situation that probably isn't going to come up often, but at least community members know that if they feel like they've been wronged or their kid's been wronged, at least they have another method for rectifying what they feel is wrong. At least they get an opportunity to speak to another level to see whether or not they can have their issue fixed. So.
Can I ask a question?
You may.
Well,
it's your meeting.
My question is, I apologize. My question is this. So because there's all this new language in the law that says you must, I know restorative practice is one of that, you must engage in like 8 different steps before you get to that point. Who else is looking at that data? Like, who else, like if, I know that at one point in time we had somebody looking at it to see if we were disproportionately suspending students of color.
Correct.
Or minorities. So who looks at that? Like, is there another checks and balance that's really already in place for that?
At the local level, there's not. Those issues related to disproportionality come from the state of Michigan. Once we've made decisions and we've executed, our policies and our decisions, we turn all that data into the state of Michigan. They then look at the numbers and come back to us and say, based on our perspective, you have over-identified students in certain categories for things like suspensions and expulsions.
Okay, but you just said that there's 8 additional things, like factors that you have to look at before you would suspend them. Is anybody going to be looking at that? I guess
We're required to look at that internally. The middle school or high school principals, if they recommend expulsion or suspension longer than 10 days, that automatically comes to me. Then they have to come and make their case to me in a meeting with the parents and the family. And then I make a decision based on the information that I have, looking at those 8 factors. And then we inform the family what the decision is. And so that's the process that we currently engage in.
Okay. Yes, Mr. Smith.
Whether it's Mrs. Stevenson or Dr. Weber, I know you spent some time as an administrator in a building. I understand the words that Dr. Matthews used, where if you're an administrator in a building and you're dealing with a situation on a consistent, regular basis, it would be difficult to communicate that entirety to anyone, probably, because you're living in it. Is that accurate? I mean, is that how you feel? I spent some time with one of our principals this past week, and again left the building humbled in my ignorance of what some of our administrators are faced with on a daily basis. And she was sharing with me the story of this family that's in their building, and she was delayed for our meeting because she was basically restraining a student who was, having a bad day, and the message I got with great clarity from this building administrator was the last thing that was on the list of desires for outcome is to send that student home or suspend him, because that's one of the reasons why the student was acting out in the first place.
So, first, I appreciate your humility, Mr. Smith. I think the trust that we put in our building administrators or superintendent for a knowledge of what's occurring in a particular case is critical. The shift that's also occurred in the last, I'd say 5 to 7 years has been one around less punitive pieces where students are thrown out. Ms. Stevenson could speak to that in her role. Dr. Matthews could in his role, and mine in my role. You mentioned, yes, I was a high school principal and a middle school principal. In the days I was a high school principal and served, there were some very clear guidelines and expectations for expulsion of students that would go to the board level. I participated in many expulsion hearings in the work there that I did as a high school principal. The mechanisms that are different around restorative practices, Lieutenant Governor Calley has done a tremendous amount around restraint, seclusion, things of those pieces, have really changed the landscape. In really starting with this humble piece of humility and realizing that Principal Baker's here in the building tonight during this, that our principals are the first line that work with those families and kids and know that situation, the situation that's occurring. That discretion that they have then is often passed on or used in the disciplinary case. Anytime if a student has an IEP and we are going to put that student out over 10 days, you need to go to something called a manifestation to see if that behavior is a manifestation of their individual educational plan. The discretion then of that building principal and the superintendent in all but a very few cases really lies in that knowledge of it. There are just a couple spots, and we're talking about the length of a blade and knife, that would mean something coming to you as a school board. So on that piece of it, you're asking me this question directly. Times have changed. The approach to discipline has changed, is changing. And what you heard that teacher say, or that principal say, is having a relationship with that particular student. My guess is that she knows that family very, very well and understands what needs to be done to keep that student safe and other students safe. Because I'm going to say, there's not one building administrator in this district who would willingly keep a student in their building who is a danger to themselves or others. And I don't believe our superintendent would either.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. O'Connor.
I think we're all focused. I don't think this has anything to do with how we discipline or not discipline people. This is about whether parents are allowed to appeal to us or not. And it blows my mind that we're having this discussion that says that the board may give up its decision-making authority on something like this.
And I answered the question.
I wasn't rebutting you, Dr.
Okay,
Weber. I was
okay.
giving my opinion on this subject,
Thank you.
which is what Mrs. Murphy asked me to do.
I understand that Mr. Smith has asked some pointed questions, though, that he is, and as a new board member, I think that it's okay to ask some of those questions. Things have changed. That's why the language has changed in the policy. So I appreciate your passion that you believe that this needs to rest with the board, but I think that's a discussion for the entire board. Is other board members that want to have having gone to the seclusion and restraint conferences, I know how drastically different it is. I would be hard-pressed to see that there would be anybody that would come to us that we would overturn, and then instead you've created false hope also for a parent that is not necessarily, in my opinion, that's not necessarily a favorable thing to do. But
I do have a question. In a former district where I worked, they had a disciplinary hearing where that was made up of cabinet members and administrators. Do we have that in our process?
Our process is when a principal would make a recommendation, the disciplinary hearing is in front of the superintendent. It involves the principal making the recommendation, any teachers and or counselors, staff members that they feel are appropriate to be there, the student and the student's parents, and that's the disciplinary hearing that we have.
Okay.
I know of one district, I'm sure there's many more, although I haven't done the research, but I know one district where the board committee, there's a disciplinary committee, just like we have a policy committee, like we have a financial committee. The board is on disciplinary committee. It's another way a district does it. I'm not advocating that, I'm just saying that there are situations with other boards where they actually get involved in the decision-making process.
I know you're trying to pull. Go ahead, Ms. Stevenson, I wanted to value your comment.
No, I guess my question is it the concern of the board that there's not an appeal process, or is it that there can be an appeal towards us, they come to us? Because I feel like if we want to give them an option to say, once Dr. Matthews has made a decision, they can come back and appeal it, but why do they need to present it to us? Why can't they present it to him and whoever's on the disciplinary committee?
I guess my sense is we do rely on Dr. Matthews for a lot from his insight and expertise, and the same with the cabinet. I don't see many times in the short time I've served where we've collectively said, no, we totally disagree with you, we're going in a different direction, nor did I hear that that was typically what happened with appeals. As a parent who had a son asked to leave school one day, it feels, at least to me, that I would like there to be that option for a parent. But again, I would rely prior to that hearing on really seeking to understand from the building administrator directly or from Dr. Matthews, to the extent of my ability, really what's going on. But I guess I do think that it would be a nice option to have for a parent.
Other Mr. O'Connor.
And just from a historical perspective, just so you understand how we used to do it, again, I'm not saying that we would do it this way, but the way it worked is you would get a lot of that research. The board basically acted as a jury, and both sides would come to us and literally state their case, and we would do that investigation, and we would look at what happened, and the administration would present the steps during the suspension and then the recommended expulsion and explain the rationale, et cetera, et cetera. And then the other side, the parent would then, during the appeal process, give their perspective on it, and then we would go in literally as a jury of 7 and make a decision. That's how the process did work.
Mr. Cook.
I guess the one thing that kind of brings it home for me is, there are these 7 steps or 7 disciplines that they have to look at.
I think it's 8.
7 or 8.
7.
Oh,
7 or 8. Okay.
Sorry.
That they have to do, but you asked the question if they were reviewed on the outside. No, they're only reviewed internally, and I guess this gives the community a chance to make sure through having it appealed to the board that all those steps were properly followed. And I would expect that if anything did come to appeal to us, that the administration would lay out all that documentation to justify their case, and then again, we end up acting as a jury between what's laid out by the administration and what the parents bring forward.
Okay.
I would ask a clarifying question. The option that's presented, superintendent's decision on such suspensions and expulsions can be appealed to the board. Does the board want to weigh in on suspensions longer than 10 days? Or does the board just want to deal with expulsions? Because anything that is longer than 10 days must come to the superintendent. And I would suggest that the appropriate option would be that the superintendent's decision on expulsions can be appealed to the Board of Education, as opposed to suspensions longer than 10 days.
I would agree.
I agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. I thought that was the current policy. I didn't even realize that the board under current policy was involved.
They're not currently, and that's why I wanted to ask that clarifying question.
Absolutely.
And it doesn't even define what long-term suspension is here.
Correct.
Which
So we would come back to the board with this one, that the superintendent's decision on expulsions can be appealed to the Board of Education.
Okie doke. Is it everybody comfortable with that? Okay. Moving forward to curriculum development. 3001.
The current proposed language in the policy is that the superintendent is responsible for development, implementation, and ongoing evaluation of the school district's curriculum. That we would add a bullet point: the superintendent will inform the board of any new curriculum or course offerings or changes to curriculum or course offerings. The other option is that no course or course of study, that should read not course of student but course of study, no course or course of study shall be taught in the schools of this district unless it has been adopted by the board. So the recommendation would be to go with the current proposed language, which is the superintendent's responsible for development, implementation, and ongoing evaluation of the school district curriculum, and that the superintendent will inform the board of any new curriculum or course offerings or changes to curriculum or course offerings.
All right. I know there's some passion around this particular subject. I would just ask that we respect each other's right to speak, and that everyone would maybe get a chance to speak before somebody chimed in again. Thank you, Mr. Mena.
Okay. So, I mean, you obviously know where I stand on this one. I think this board has been, for the most part, very supportive and has adopted a majority of classes that have been recommended to this board. I think we've been very, very supportive of this administration. I think they've done a very good job laying out why it is that they felt that a particular class would be an asset to our district, and in return we've pretty much always supported it. So I don't know why we want to change course and take that level of accountability away from a board. Again, as I mentioned, for me and for many, this one thing is probably one of the biggest responsibilities of any school board, is approving curriculum. That is one of the major responsibilities of a school board. Again, we've always been supportive. I don't see that changing, but I do think there has to be check and balance and a level of accountability.
I would ask a clarifying question on this. The option says no course or course of study shall be taught in the schools of this district unless it has been adopted by the board. So we have every summer teachers come to Atlas, our Atlas work in the summer. At the end of the school year, we spend a week where we invite teachers of every grade level or subject to meet together to review their curriculum, to make changes to their curriculum, to add and subtract as they see fit. If there's kind of content that has proved not to be effective, they will modify that content or change that content to make it more effective for the students. With the proposed option, would all of that work have to come to the board to get approved, or are those kinds of revisions not the intent of this option?
No course or course of study shall be taught in the schools of district unless it's been talked to the board.
Well, because we're doing this for long term, it seems like we'd need to define if that's the direction we decide to go.
Because I would suggest humbly that would place the board in an interesting position of reviewing a lot of the work that the teachers do based on their experience with the students in the schools, and so that's why I'm asking that clarifying question.
It's a good question. It's a good question. Other board members that would like to speak on the development of curriculum and their thoughts on this particular one? Okay, nobody wants to talk, so you can talk again.
So what is the current policy in your opinion, Dr. Matthews? I ask because it's not in front of me right now, but what is the current policy?
That's a good question. My understanding of the current policy is any new courses of study need to come to the board for approval, and that internal changes that we make based on our experience and materials that we purchase do not have to come to the board.
So one person's opinion. My understanding, or what my expectation was on this, is any new courses would be approved by the board, or any courses with substantive changes would be approved by the board. You and I had a discussion about it. What I felt was a new course that we added. I think it was in place of a gym class. It was an officiating class.
Officiating class. Correct.
I felt it was a new class because it was clearly something that we hadn't done before, and that never came before the board. It wasn't a contentious conversation.
Nope.
I was just curious.
Right.
I didn't understand why every once in a while I'd hear about these new classes, some that we would approve and some that would never come before the board. So if nothing else, I would certainly like some clarity around that concern that I have when regardless of which direction we go here. But certainly I would support the board approving curriculum. I certainly don't want to cause any extra work. You guys, I fully expect that every teacher and every lead would recommend changes to classes every year. I don't really call those significant and substantive, but certainly new classes and big changes, yeah.
Mr. O'Connor.
Well, I think what we're saying here is, by the way, I agree with Mr. Mena 100%. I think what we really need to define here is what does substantive mean. I mean, certainly if a textbook changes, that should come to us because even in the Les Galberson policies.
Correct. You have to approve textbook change.
So any textbook change certainly would come to us. Are we editing when you said certain things don't work with a student? I mean, to me, is it a message issue or is it a changing the assessment issue? So to me, if it's a message, to me, I would define that as a substantive change to curriculum. If we're literally changing, the learning objectives as to why, and we're going to teach it this way as opposed to this way. If it's just editing, this test didn't work, or they didn't understand this section, so we're going to try it this way. If it's a delivery system change, I guess is what I'm saying, I don't consider that substantive because we're looking at the delivery of all our teachers anyhow to be more effective and connected to our students. But you know, if it's a content change, I think we should look at it, especially if there's a change in textbook.
Textbooks come to the board for because of the financial aspect of purchasing textbooks. Historically, new editions don't come to the board of the same textbook. You know, it's you have a textbook that's 8 years old, new edition comes out. We adopt that without bringing that to the board through the budgeting process through Ms. Minnick and Dr. Weber's budget, and so you know. From my perspective, adding that bullet point that we would inform the board of any new curriculum or course offerings or changes to curriculum or course offerings would streamline the process, keep the board informed. If the board raised significant concerns about new course offerings or changes, the board, I think, could certainly raise those points. And as has been suggested here this evening, we have the relationship where we talk with each other and would put the brakes on concerns that the board would have as we move forward. But I think the proposed language addresses some of the points that or concerns that the board has. I think the option is a little bit unclear to me exactly what the expectation would be.
Yes.
I just had a comment in the spirit of when we were going through our existing policies with Mr. Sutton, and when we would get stuck, he'd say, "Well, are you doing this today?" And very often our answer was, "No, we're not doing this today." And so I wonder on the option, no course or course of study shall be taught in the schools. So have we voted? Has this board voted on all the courses that we have in our schools now?
I will answer that carefully. The board has voted on the majority of them. There are certain exceptions. The officiating course is an easy exception to identify, but new courses that become a regular part of the curriculum have been brought to this board for discussion and approval.
There have been times when you've run a pilot.
We have run a pilot on occasion.
Class on occasion.
I can think of IB psychology. I think was brought to the board. The board voted it down. I think there was a course in I don't remember the official title, communications that related to our student voice work that the board voted down. There have been other courses that the board has approved in my tenure here, and so I think the proposed language would be responsive to the concerns of the board. I think the option that's provided needs to be better defined if that's the option that the board would choose.
But that option is really status quo. We would just be doing what I was asking,
Correct.
Which would be clarifying exactly what would be brought before us. And if I may, just for clarification, I just want to make sure folks understand that one particular class that you talked about, the student voice one, was voted down, but it was only voted down because we had asked for additional information and a board member forced to vote that night, so we never got the additional information. And that's really what led to that being voted down that day. So,
and that was communication camp, not a course.
Okay. Yeah, I think I remember that.
So on that point, the conversation at the board table, I think, is telling in the sense that the term substantive and the knowledge of what it takes and what it means when our staff is putting a curriculum together, executing the curriculum, making adjustments and changes. Without a clear definition in my mind of what substantive is, then we would need to bring that work that's done in the summertime, that's done in all those pieces in front of the board. Prime example would be the science curriculum that is working splendidly. Well, you've had board updates on that work. The faith that we have in our teachers to produce that, to bring that forward has occurred. And so I need a definition from the board from your perspective of what substantive is. My work is to work with the teachers in our district on a daily basis to craft curricular opportunities for our kids and I don't believe we have a clear definition on what substantive is.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you have something? Oh, okay. I just want to say a couple things real quick before we get into potentially modifying kind of the language that we have here. So we haven't necessarily had a regular, I mean, I know that occasionally, Mr. Weber, you come to us with specific curricular reports. When you did the science kits for us, when we made that change, you've come to us before with kind of that the pieces of that. But in terms of kind of an overall, and this, I'm going to tie this together in a minute, but in terms of the overall curriculum development, like really laying that out for this board so this board sees where we're going with things and that kind of stuff. Like, is there a way that we perhaps, because it is a crucial thing that the board kind of is involved in as a local body, the deliberative body. Is there a way that we could craft language that says that while the superintendent is responsible, blah, 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 ongoing, this ongoing evaluation, implementation, and development will be I don't want to say a consistent focus at meetings, but there will be, so that we're never caught in surprise by something. So if there are concerns, they can be voiced here at the table. I mean, I'm just trying to meet kind of the need that there is to occasionally make some changes, whether it's based on law, which happens sometimes, we know.
Or whether it's based on the needs of our kids.
The kids, right. Which we've always been, I think, when we've added new courses, particularly at the high school, at least from what I've seen, it's been fairly consistently driven by kind of the kids have an interest and, unless the class fills, you don't run it. So it's driven somewhat by the choices that the kids make.
Or there's a shift in standards and also a pedagogical shift that we're seeing in our K through 4 in science.
Right, exactly. Which you've informed us about. I mean, so I guess I'm just trying to figure out a way to meet the needs of your needs as the curricular expert in our district.
I just need clarity.
Right.
And I quite frankly don't have it. Okay. And the piece is I would welcome public discourse rather than individual staff members going to individual board members, then those individual board members taking a conversation to this venue, sharing that out as it's somehow completely accurate and in everything that's there. I would welcome real substantive conversation on curricular issues as well as board member perspectives with their expertise on curriculum and what they're hearing and what they feel for that conversation. I think the mechanism has to be very clear. I really don't feel right now that there is a knowledge of exactly how much time that would take for this board to engage with that information. If our teachers have spent 22,000 hours aligning our curriculum in the last 7 years, you can imagine then if the standard is, as Dr. Matthews had intimated could be, that every move needs to be viewed, discussed, sanctioned, approved, then we just need to have a mechanism that we're ready to get into that with as a board. Okay. And I would also say there were conversations about this policy, this whole conversation, and people not feeling good because the whole board wasn't there, those pieces as well. We have to build then, if that's the case, in the direction, the pleasure of the board to go, a mechanism that makes sure that we don't have redundancy where people would say, well, I was not at that meeting, I wasn't informed of this as well.
Okay. Good points. Mr. O'Connor.
So a high-tech way of trying to make a decision is to Google the definition of substantive for clarity. It says important, meaningful, or considerable. Is that enough direction?
I need you to Google pedagogical for me.
I hear you.
Okay. Mr. Smith.
I agree that Dr. Weber needs some definition of substantive. My sense from the work that I did in preparing to even throw my hat in the ring for the ability and the pleasure to sit here was that one of the key components of a school board was to approve recommended, tuition or curriculum. So directionally, I think that's our responsibility. But I also don't think that I know personally, I'm not capable of deciding what textbook is the most appropriate for what class. But I do think directionally speaking, the board should be made aware of substantive, differences or changes that we make. Does that make sense?
So are you suggesting the option that's presented, or are you comfortable with the proposed language that says we will inform the board of any new curriculum or course offerings or changes to curriculum or course offerings, and we could add before implementation? And then if the board has significant concerns, we could stop the process at that point. But
so you're saying it would be a discussion that the board would have, and we wouldn't vote on it necessarily?
Correct.
Which wouldn't be status quo right now. That would be changing current policy.
Right.
That's how it is now.
No,
We
the way it
currently
is.
vote on it.
Right.
And that's really what brought this to light is again, there's no question. I mean, I understand the concern about substantive. The only reason I brought up that word was because, again, I still to this day don't really have good clarity on this officiating class.
Right.
Okay?
Yep.
Was that, so maybe you can explain it now, because I still, to me, we can't just call it a gym class and say we're not going to bring it to the board because we've always taught gym, and that's just a pseudo gym class. To me, that's a whole different course. So that's the only reason I brought up the whole substantive issue, right? I trust that this administration, when they're adding new classes like that, will bring it to us for approval. I threw in substantive because maybe that's what I felt that was a substantive change. I'm not looking to overmanage this thing. I just want it to be status quo and work the way I've always expected it. Any new courses come before the board.
Mr. Cook.
I would argue that Dr. Weber does not need a definition of substantive because he used it in his own discussion, welcoming substantive discussion from others. But in that,
interesting.
Aside from that, we have a place where we can put definitions and we can define substantive in there as Google defines it or as we find our way to define it. Which brings up a point that it's supposed to be in the appendix, which has not been provided to us. There's supposed to be appendix with
the glossary.
When last
definition
meeting there was an appendix of definitions that was supposed to be there. Okay. I for one like the optional language that the board approves. New courses and courses of study.
So could is the option that no new course shall be taught in the schools of this district unless it has been adopted by the board? Is as opposed to the option as it is written?
Well, right, because we don't expect you to come back and have us approve any classes you may have forgotten in the past to have us approve. But yes, so anything going forward, it would be my expectation.
So as we look at, one of the practical dilemmas that we would face, for example, is, our Atlas work occurs that last, basically the third and fourth week of June. And so if they make, that's why I suggest it would be no new course shall be taught, because, our third grade teachers are looking at their science curriculum, for example, and saying, this unit needs modification. The standards are saying the same, but we're going to approach them in a different way than we currently teach them. I would suggest that does not need to come to the board because the standards are staying the same.
Yeah, I don't think anyone disagrees.
But a new course would come to the board. So if we said in third grade we're ditching all the science that we're teaching and we're going to teach all new stuff, that would come to the board.
Okay.
One last question, please.
That's a lie. That it's one last question.
Go ahead. You can ask more than that question, Tom. It doesn't have to be your last one.
No, that's okay. Does the board currently have within its authority the option to bring to a discussion at a board meeting an existing class or an existing pedagogical approach in the classroom? You know what I mean?
Sure.
Well,
that could become an agenda item, certainly.
Yeah,
the board controls its agenda.
Yeah,
so if the board had...
So we always could go back and and say, hey, we've observed this, or it's come to our attention, and we want to revisit this particular class or this particular.
I mean, sometimes it's a simple phone call, I'll say, to Mr.
Yeah,
Weber
I would
saying, hey,
appreciate-
were you
I would
aware?
appreciate those conversations occurring with either Dr. Matthews or myself, rather than the first time I hear about it coming to one of these meetings.
Right. So,
Which has
so
happened.
a phone call just saying,
Can I-
hey, I know, I heard that this is going on in this classroom. Were you aware of it? Help me
Okay, so
understand
again,
what's going
just
on.
directionally, as a person that's just here for a period of time, presently, I think we're fortunate to have Dr. Matthews in his role and Dr. Weber. There's no guarantee that we would have such competence in those positions in the future, and therefore I think the responsibility of the school board would be to approve new curriculum.
New courses.
Correct. And periodically revisit our current curriculum to see if anything else should be.
We you have not been here an extended period of time, but in the past we have brought our content area leaders to the board, set up computers for the board to review content with those content area leaders. So we've had those discussions.
Perfect.
So we can continue to have those discussions because it is important that that our community and the board have confidence in the curriculum that we're teaching. And so we have tried over the 8 years that I've been here to provide the board with multiple opportunities to examine and interact with the curriculum in a meaningful way, not just having Dr. Weber or a content area leader make a presentation, but giving the board opportunity to explore and ask questions, and so we will continue to do that. But as I hear the discussion that the board has engaged in, what you would like the language to say, I would phrase it this way, that the superintendent is responsible for the development, implementation, and ongoing evaluation of the school district curriculum. No new course shall be taught in the schools of this district unless it has been adopted by the board.
Can I just suggest too, I like the idea that you'll, and which you do anyways, but I like the idea that you'll inform the board of.
Yes, we can leave that bullet point.
Because
in
you
there as
already
well.
do that.
Right.
Inform us of changes like with the science kits and things like that. It's not a new.
The standards, right.
It's not a new standard, it's just a different way of teaching it. Yeah.
Point of clarification, we were not informed about the officiating class.
Correct.
So
that
that
is
should be a
correct.
best practice that we are informed about.
Yes, exactly. That's what I'm saying.
Curriculum
That's been established.
Which
I
is a
think.
great gym class.
Oh, I know it is.
And could well have been born out of the fact that they are desperate for referees because
So,
they have asked
so
me
we
to
will,
be one,
we will bring that option back to the board next week.
so. Okay.
Thank you.
So will we work that language?
Yes, we will.
Did you have something to add to that?
Yes, I'm questioning about major changes, substantive changes to courses.
We're not including that anywhere, I don't think, are we?
Well, I do believe it should, because one that pops to my mind is the robotics course, which was a major change to that curriculum, that course, and was not brought to the board. You know, it's not that, I guess it's not that we're looking to, you know, say no to all this stuff, but, you know, it's in a direction, it was in a direction we want to go, so I don't think there were any complaints about it, but it was not brought to the board. And if we're going to bring new courses, major changes to courses need to come too.
Let me and Dr. Weber, or Dr. Weber and
I am not, I know that is something that you're very passionate about. I think that's something that I didn't see it as I thought it was, my understanding was that there are courses that morph based on changes in technology, some of those courses are taught differently because they have to be taught differently. If we're going to get into every course that, I just don't know what the threshold of that is and what that looks like.
Right.
And if you get into that.
That's the definition of substantive change.
And I would suggest that the bullet point of the superintendent will inform the board of any new curriculum or course offerings or changes to curriculum or course offerings kind of would address that issue. And that if that raises a red flag at that point, then we could engage in a fuller discussion. And so As Mr. Cook suggested, adding a unit on robotics in the course, we would come to the board and say, this is what we're doing. Or, not just robotics, but, pick a course.
Yeah, this is why we're changing it.
This is why we're changing it. This is what we're doing. It fits within the standards of the course. It fits within the standards of the curriculum. We just wanted to inform you of these changes. And then so I think that bullet point might address that point that Mr. Cook's raising without having to change additional language.
Yeah. Are you comfortable with that?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly, we have a piece.
We'll see how practice follows.
Yep.
Well, we also have a standard for his curriculum, for the curriculum department in his evaluation. So if we find that he's not doing some of this, there is a level of accountability there as well. So,
correct.
Okay.
And there are parts in the system as well where, depending on, as Dr. Matthews said, if somebody makes a pivot and goes forward in a well-meaning teacher and administrator feel like a robotics class are going in that direction, I'd be happy to put something like the robotics class through the level of scrutiny that the board put the incubator through. I would welcome that conversation at the board table and an opportunity to do that.
Okay. All right, we will move on to our next recommendation. I think we've gotten quite a bit of feedback on that one.
I think we have clarity.
Other matters of employment. This is, I'm trying to remember, go ahead and read this.
So the proposed language, this is on outside activities. No employee shall attempt to sell or influence a student to buy any product, article, instrument, service, or any or other such item which would directly or indirectly benefit that employee.
And this is new language because we don't currently
correct.
have this as a
policy. This is in other matters of employment, correct.
Right.
So that's why there's only one option, because this is new language.
Right. So, anybody have discussion on that? I mean, I think that makes sense to me from the standpoint of you don't want a teacher to kind of basically a conflict of interest.
Right.
Within that.
Okay.
And then
the second piece of that is there's a proposed language on ownership of works. There is no current language in the policies that have been provided, so we would provide the option and recommend this as the option that students who develop ideas, products, works of art, music compositions, and similar items will retain ownership. So that even though they do it within the confines of the course of study or the time of school, it still is the ownership is retained with the student and not by the district.
Mr. O'Connor.
What about an employee?
I believe there's policy in there that an employee it's not, but I will clarify that to make sure.
Do we know
that if the employee develops something during their scheduled time of employment, it is owned by the district.
Yeah.
Nice to see we're taking a stand one way or the other, but I would be curious how universities do this too, because I do believe that universities do have a share of ownership, because it is developed as part of
the course of study.
Course of study,
right?
So why would we be any different?
My perspective on that is that because we are. Even though they are developing this under the tutelage and the expertise of the teachers in the building, it is still the creative work of the student, and so I believe that this would encourage students to be creative and develop products, realizing that it's their product and not the school district's product. And so that's my perspective.
It's the same argument that could be made at a university. They could argue that too, and the one thing I don't want to see is teachers getting their name put on copyrights and patents that the kids come up with too. So,
on the student part, a person chooses to attend a university and pay to go to that university. In a public school setting, it's a compulsory education, so the kids are here. If we're offering that opportunity here, that's where I see the difference in is that it's a different arrangement with that student going there.
They're required to be in school.
And the reason this even came up is because there is a policy about
there is a policy on
the teachers.
Staff.
That's the opposite. Gotcha. So that came up. Okay.
And then the last piece is just that we had not identified the web accessibility coordinator, and so we have identified that position who will be the web accessibility coordinator. It's the marketing and public relations specialist.
Okay, I'm going to ask before we talk about the merit pay, do people need a break?
I actually have one more question here on this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If you don't mind, I'll address it to Ms. Minnick. Policy 5004 and policy 6013. One is surplus property, the other is surplus assets.
Yes.
And I can see where in the definition and in the policy, one says basically is a capital asset, not necessarily physical property, and the other one is buildings, which are capital assets, land, which is a capital asset. I'm just wondering why we have two policies on that. You know, they're all assets, they're all, you know, capital property. So to streamline things, and I missed it last week when Mr. Sutton was here from Les Galverson. So
We can get clarification on that, unless Ms. Minnick has clarification tonight.
I can provide a brief answer. You'll notice that parts of those policies have been stricken in the new revision. That's because it was an unnoticed duplication of wording. So what is resulting and what remains in the policy for those capital assets for land and that kind of thing, and for the supplies, remains to be our current language of our current policies.
So we're considering supplies, property, and land and capital as assets.
Yes, the capital assets are requiring Board of Ed approval for disposal, whereas the supplies, obsolete materials, supplies, those types of things do not require board approval, but requires the superintendent to periodically review for obsolescence and those types of things.
That's more of an explanation why we have two.
Okay.
All right, so just so I understand what's going to happen next meeting, we're going to vote on these policy changes next meeting?
Yes.
Okay, so are we voting on the entire policy manual next meeting with the changes as we address? That's where the confusion was coming. I thought we were going to vote on the policy manual except for the ones we pulled out and then vote on those individually.
No.
That was my, okay, all right, so which is why you were polling the board on those.
Yes, I apologize for not being clear about that. But yes, the whole manual will come to us next week for approval. The language, you'll notice, will be changed on these that we discussed tonight to reflect the conversation that we had this evening. All right?
You asked for a break, and so...
Okay, so it's 8:52 right now. Can we take an 8-minute break and be back at 9 o'clock?
It's actually 8:50.
8:51. My iPad is incorrect then.
Oh,
okay.
8:52.
Okay, I was the prophet. Okay, so we will return at 9 o'clock. We are, oh, are you, okay, we're back. We are returning to the Thursday, September 27th regular meeting of the Board of Education. The next item on our agenda is under information and discussion. For information and discussion, it's the merit plan report. Dr. Matthews.
Last year we brought the merit plan that we're required to have by law to the Board of Education for discussion. After that discussion, we implemented the plan. So this comes to the board tonight again for discussion. Based on the discussion tonight, we would move forward with implementing this plan, communicating it to our staff, unless the board has significant changes that they wish to make. So to recognize the job performance and job accomplishments of its teachers and administrators that exceeds expectations, the Novi Community School District Board of Education designates up to $200,000 in merit pay for the 2018-19 school year. Eligible teachers and administrators will be recognized. Eligibility will be based on the following criteria. Employee has to be classified as teacher, licensed non-classroom personnel. The licensed non-classroom personnel is a specific designation for social workers, counselors who may not be certified teachers, and so that's why that definition is in there, or administrators. Employees must have been employed for an entire school year. Employees must be rated effective or highly effective. The merit program encourages our teachers and administrators to use best practice that will result in continuing and improving performance by our students. We will focus on improving instructional practice as we align our curriculum assessment and evaluation. This focus on improved instructional practice and alignment supports our effort to use best practice in general education, special education, English language students, and the use of our MTSS 504 system. Merit is proposed to be divided into two sections. Section 1 would be teachers will receive a merit award of $5,000 for completing the National Board Certification process. In addition, per the Novi Education Association contract, teachers who earn National Board Certification will receive an additional stipend annually of $1,000. There are 16 areas of National Board Certification, content specific, but also career and technical education, library media, school counseling, and so on. There's an initial cost of $1,900 for National Board Certification program that will be covered by the individual. The cost is divided into 4 components. Each of those components cost $475 apiece for a total of $1,900. Candidates have to possess a bachelor's degree, a valid state teaching license, and 3 years of classroom or school counselor experience prior to starting the certification process. In the year that a teacher earns National Board Certification, and with verification that one has been awarded National Board Certification, the teacher will receive their merit award of $5,000 in the last paycheck of the contract year. National Board Certification can be completed in 1 year, but often takes multiple years. One must attempt each of the 4 components within the first 3 years of the candidacy. The candidate has a 5-year window to achieve certification. If a candidate does not achieve certification within the 5-year window, the candidate must start the entire certification process again as a first-time candidate. For the 2018-19 school year, registration is open. It opened in April, and it closes in February of 2019. I would propose that as part of this process for merit, that we would award teachers who had previously earned National Board Certification this merit award of $5,000, and there are 10 teachers in our district who have that certification. If other teachers have started the process and completed during the 2018-19 school year and the Human Resource Office is notified, those teachers will also receive their merit award. So that's the first section of merit. The second section of merit would be the current process that we have, that we focus on student proficiency, student growth, English learner progress, and students with disability performance. Teachers, licensed non-classroom personnel, and administrators assigned to a school will earn merit based on their school performance in the following areas. And those are the 4 areas. The performance indicators will be gathered from data reported in the Michigan Dashboard Accountability Scorecard. Teachers, licensed non-classroom personnel, and administrators assigned at the district level will earn merit based on the district's performance in those categories. And this is the same process that we had this year. And again, we define student proficiency. There are certain levels, 100%. They could earn 100% of the eligible merit, 75%, or 50%, or no merit based on the performance in those 4 areas. And so that's what we would propose this evening. And again, the merit payment would be distributed the last paycheck on the NEA contractual year, which is the second paycheck in August. The merit committee was composed of Ms. Stevenson, Mr. Smith, and Mrs. Hood. And this was that we had 2 discussions in person, some discussions via email, and so we present this to the board tonight for discussion, and if the board gives us the go-ahead, we would begin to implement this for the 2018-19 school year.
Okay.
I think this is a very good merit program. I feel like we've taken some factors into consideration. We've divided into 2 sections. The first section being that we want our teachers to continue to enhance their craft. So therefore, we want them to be better in the classroom, which will also affect our students and their education and making sure that they're doing better. So I think this is a great program, and we wanted to take into consideration. We wanted it to be worthy of them taking these taking this course or getting the certification. And with the $5,000 merit pay, we thought that would be substantial for them.
Heck yeah.
Yeah. But it's costing them $1,900.
It's costing them $1,900. However, they also still get an annual stipend of $1,000.
Great.
A couple questions. How long is that national
Board certification?
National certification.
I think it can be up to 10 years. You'll see the list of teachers who
Because
currently
some of
have.
them vary, and I see we had one that received it last year, and hers,
The
expires
national board
before.
certification is the one that controls that, and so
Okay.
that they will at times change how long that certification lasts.
A couple of other things here. One is rather than having the teachers be employed for the entire year, I would say they'd have to be employed, and it's prorated based on the time. We hired one tonight at no fault of theirs that they weren't here for the entire year. It just we find people that as we need, and we fill those needs.
Okay.
The other thing is on most of the teachers, we're looking at proficiency as per the state assessment. Do we have those state assessments scores back in time for this to be paid out? Because I know when we went through your objectives that wasn't necessarily there, or there wasn't necessarily actionable data to work off of on that. So
the performance or the kind of the performance indicator piece would always be a year in arrear. It would be last year's data, because that typically is not reported to us until September or October of the current school year.
So any new teacher we wouldn't have that taught for 1 year, we wouldn't have any data on them.
The data is not teacher specific; it's school specific, and so teachers who are hired and work in that school would be rewarded, and they would be the benefit of people who had come before them.
That happened this past year. Oh, excuse me.
Correct.
I know that happened this past year. There were teachers that had nothing to do with that score that got merit pay, and the teacher that retired and may have directly impacted that score didn't get mailed a check.
Well, we're in the process of clarifying that. So those teachers will, if they were employed last year, will receive that money. And but the part of that's when you retire, it's hard to. They can't come back and work for the district, so it's hard to cut them a check and all that kind of stuff. And so, but we're working to clarify that to make sure that they get their merit bonus as well. And we believe that this system incentivizes those teachers to participate in school improvement processes, participate in the work of the school, to continue receiving that merit compensation.
I guess my point would be the state assessment is outdated by the time this is implemented, where the national assessment, which we get a proficiency rating out of, is up to date. So why don't we use the up-to-date data so we're not tracking down teachers that are responsible for the growth and trying to get them paid versus teachers who weren't responsible for any of the proficiency getting money? The
performance indicators that we've identified, for example, English learner progress, We don't, the national assessment that we use, the NWA, doesn't track English learner progress. Students with disabilities performance, the NWA doesn't really track that performance. And so we wanted to include those pieces because we didn't want people to believe it was only about high achieving students helping buildings earn merit compensation. And so we could certainly review this, and this is an annual review that we will do with the board. And so as we continue to move forward, we could look at using NWA data instead of the MSTEP data and the SAT data. I think for this year, it would make sense to continue this program for a second year and then look to make changes in our third year starting in 1920.
Okay. Well, I guess I have a question then, because I think it's kind of imperative that we use the MSTEP data, because that's what where our teachers are getting evaluated on now, where 40% of it is student growth.
Half of that 40% is state assessment data.
Exactly. And they're using the previous year.
Correct. They are.
Any other discussion? I think, yes, Mr. O'Connor.
A couple of comments. First of all, kudos to the committee to break this into two sections. I think this is wonderful, and especially the $5,000. It's something that's clearly very substantial. A couple of thoughts as we're brainstorming this before we implement. It's always bothered me that the teacher of the year got a car, and the building teachers of the year never got anything, and the district HR district never did anything to be part of that, or to give some kind of merit or pay for that kind of recognition. We always relied on the NEF, and it was kind of a all or nothing kind of thing. I mean, what's wrong with, and I'm just throwing this out as an idea, that the NEF is given a car. Why don't we give the teacher of the year $3,000? We give the building people $2,000, and we give the support person $1,000. And it would be along the lines of this section 1, in the sense that, you're giving merit for someone who's certified. Here, we're giving dollars for teachers that had been evaluated, and that they were asked to, they were recognized as teachers of the year, as opposed to they get nothing except for, the leased car. That's one idea. The second thing we can talk about that now, or I've got one other idea. The section 2 that you've got really is the same program that we had last year. And I asked for an evaluation of last year's program, and one of the feedbacks that you got in terms of the weaknesses was that by the time this was done, teachers got enough money to buy a t-shirt. Okay? If our enrollment's going to go up 30 kids, we don't know yet, but we'll know in a couple weeks, and based on our projections, it's going to be more than 30 kids. But if it goes 30 kids above our budget, there's an extra $200,000 right there. And from the beginning during our budget conversations, I always asked for, let's do $400,000 worth of merit. Let's make it meaningful. So instead of giving a teacher a t-shirt, why don't we double the amount of money that the teachers get and give them some real merit?
I would not disagree with you, Mr. O'Connor. The one caveat I would include is that this year we stuck within the $200,000 that the board had authorized, and so we had to back off the amount that we gave teachers because there's FICA and retirement that needed to be paid on that, and so they got less than what we had originally anticipated because we wanted to do FICA and retirement and stay within that $200,000 budget. What we're suggesting here is that the whole amount would be paid out in merit, and FICA and retirement would be on top of that, and so that would include some of that extra money.
So how much would that be total? How much would that cost us total?
The FICA and retirement would be approximately another $100,000.
So the total pool here is $300,000?
That's correct.
Again, I would propose let's bump it up to $400,000 and make it more than a t-shirt. I mean, it's good that we're giving them the FICA, and it's good. Right. Again, the dollars are there. I mean, that's great that we're going $300,000. I always push for $4. Why not? I mean, and again, it's not that I'm the spender, but it's not like it's going to hurt our budget. I mean,
we've always thought of you as a spender.
Yeah. I mean, can we say $400,000 contingent on making sure that we're going to have at least 30 kids enrolled to cover ourselves, above our projections? I mean, the money's there. Let's give some merit to our teachers.
I agree. I support that.
Well, I certainly appreciate your thoughts. I guess at the last meeting, I had suggested that those suggestions be shared with the committee so they could discuss that embedded. Is that something that you guys discussed? Did you discuss either one of those suggestions?
We didn't discuss those.
Mm-mm.
I mean, I clearly made the suggestion about 4 times during the budgeting process. So this is not like a
I'm
surprise.
not saying the 400,000, but the other 2 suggestions that you had in
teacher
in
of the
terms
year.
of
Well, the other
teacher
suggestion came in after the fact, because when I saw this proposal, it's the first time I saw it, I said, oh, okay,
Yeah.
this is section 1. This is better than the system we had last year. So this is a great idea. I'm just trying to enhance it based on what I saw when it was proposed to us last week.
Did we get much feedback besides this isn't significant from the first time around?
We did not get significant. I don't know if any of the assistant principals had any feedback. I received
Assistant superintendents.
Yes, sorry.
They haven't been demoted.
Yeah, they haven't. The one item that Mr. O'Connor mentioned is that it wasn't a significant amount. I did get some of that feedback. I also got feedback that it was appreciated, that they received a merit award. As we've said at this table before, it's a tricky business because the board could not unilaterally take all the money that we have and make it merit, because the teachers and administrators have a right to bargain for wages and compensation. And so the board couldn't unilaterally say, we're going to give it all in merit, and then go to the teachers and administrators and say, we have no money to bargain with, because that would be a violation of PARA, which is the Public Employment Relations Act. And so we're trying to strike a balance here of allowing us to have some flexibility as we bargain, but also recognizing that we're legally obligated to have a merit program. We think our merit program, many merit programs in districts around us are, if teachers are effective or highly effective, if they're highly effective, they'll get $500. If they're effective, they'll get, $150. We didn't feel that, within our contract, there's already that piece that you can't go up on a step unless you're effective or highly effective. Now, having said that, all of our teachers are effective or highly effective, and so it's a little bit of a, in the past we've had a handful of teachers that haven't been effective or highly effective, but this year all of our teachers were effective or highly effective, and as we discussed, we have achievement that justifies that, those ratings, and our student growth pushes most teachers into that effective category, and so. We think this is a good balance. If the board were to say, increase the amount, the amount's already increased to $300,000 because we're paying FICA and retirement on top of the $200,000 this year. If the board wanted us to go an additional amount, we could certainly do that. I do think Mr. O'Connor's comments on Teacher of the Year are interesting to consider, and I would suggest to the board that we could take this proposal, begin to implement it, and then if the board, on October 18th either October 4th or October 18th when we come back, if the board said we'd like to have that as a piece of the merit, we could certainly begin to implement that as well, because it's well in advance of when we try to designate who those teachers of the year are.
Mr. O'Connor?
If the board's interested in this concept, I would like to even look at it and expand it and say, instead of an elementary teacher of the year, maybe we have an elementary teacher of the year and a middle teacher of the year, as well as a middle school teacher and a high school teacher. And I'd also like to suggest that we do this retroactive 5 years for the last 5 teachers of the year, just like we're doing with the certification.
Some of them are no longer with us, though, either, so do we run into that same issue?
Then they wouldn't be eligible.
Right. They have to still be employed.
Can I ask you a question, Mr. Smith, about the NEF? When they do the Teacher of the Year selection, and maybe this is also for you, I know they get entered into the other one, open schools. They just pretty much get the bragging rights for that year? I don't know how else to put that.
Do you mean the teachers that are nominated
Yes.
to not receive the car?
Yes.
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 That's correct.
And there's elementary, but there's not a from Meadows separate. They're all combined together.
And that's technically the reason for that is that
Oakland
Schools has an elementary, middle, and high school. They don't have our structure, but certainly we could review our structure. And
I would propose we can add a Meadows, but if the NEF has to decide between those two, then that person goes to Oakland County. That's a tough decision, but we're still rewarding another teacher.
Yes,
which is the concept.
I like the idea of rewarding other teachers that are recommended by their peers or others, not just necessarily performances, because it goes a long way as far as the culture and not just bragging rights but recognition. The other thing is to help Dr. Matthews out a little bit on the discussion we had earlier on the fund balance. Is this something that we could discuss possibly at the end of the year if we see we have an excess fund balance to maybe up this amount at the end of the year?
Hit that window.
to help you hit that window without taking away everything from negotiating powers and all that.
Thanks,
Let
Mr.
us help you get highly effective.
Mr. Cook, my only concern with that concept is that I don't think that's fair to teachers to say, well, it might be 200, but it might be 300, but it might be 400, depending on where we are. I mean, at the beginning of the year, this is merit.
This is the minimum.
This is what you do. This is what you get. I don't think that's a good communication strategy. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
Let's just give them the 400,000 and let's roll. I mean, we're going to have it. We're going to have it.
Mrs. Stevenson.
I would just ask if Ms. Minnick could let us know what the projected end of the year fund balance would be if we utilize those funds, that extra $100,000, if we did something for the other teachers as well, like the teachers of the year. If we gave you an amount, could you put that into a line item and then tell us what the projected fund balance would be?
I could give you, I could respond with some projections for you.
Okay, that's all I'm asking.
Sure. I just want to clarify then, if this 200,000 on here is really 300,000, I think it needs to maybe stay that.
Okay.
I think that makes sense to change that number since we're talking about, and if you want to put a,
200,000 for merit, FICA, and retirement on top of that.
right. Oh yeah, you could say that. You could say $3,000, including the FICA and retirement on any awards given, or however you want to word it, just so it's clear.
Yep.
And to me, it makes sense to do the 300,000 because then the district's looking and say, oh, that's substantial. I guess until we see is it driving student achievement? Are we doing? Is this money that we're putting in the right place? I would want to be sure that this is money that is continuing to drive that. And I love the idea of rewarding our teachers.
Well, one of the things I would add to that point is that this is recognition that our teachers are doing a great job already. I mean, our student achievement is some of the highest in the county. So it's recognition of the hard work that teachers are currently doing on school improvement, on curriculum work, on assessing students, preparing them. I was in classrooms today over at Novi Woods, and teachers were working hard to ensure that students were learning, and so I think this merit piece is and that's why we identified those categories in section 2, and the categories that we had this year. Is that it's recognition that our teachers do well, and that they perform well above the average because of the student achievement that we have from our students, and so I think it's a recognition of that already.
Okay. So does the board want to modify this to include those other teachers, adding on to the current thing, or do we want to wait until we see the numbers? Is that the suggestion, maybe to wait until we see what the numbers look like in terms of the projection before we make additions or changes to it? Because we know what this is going to look like.
We can certainly get those projections to the board by next week.
Yes, Mr. Smith. You were on the committee as well. Yeah.
I was on the committee, and you started to ask me a question about NEF. Just to remind all of you, the NEF does not fund the car.
Right.
That's a very generous gift from our friends at the Suburban Collection, which they've done for quite some time now. But it is a substantial award. I know Ms. Rice was, excited to get the lease of a brand new Charger for 3 years, and we showed it off in the parade, and that was neat. I can also share with you, as the past president of the NEF, I was obviously part of the executive committee that would review the 3 applications, and it's never easy. I remember one year, I can't remember who got the award, but one of the people that didn't get the award was Emily Plonsky at the high school, who was an amazing teacher. And you're looking at 3 amazing teachers, and you're trying to pick which one gets a $15,000 to $20,000 prize, and which person doesn't get anything. So I definitely support making a contribution to the people that do achieve that award. And then just for what it's worth, so the rest of you can know, one of the ideas that I threw out there on the committee was to have some money set aside for merit that would be a peer-nominated procedure, where any teacher peer could nominate another teacher that would have to be signed off by that building administrator. But if I saw Ms. Hood going above and beyond and I wanted to call attention to that, there's no reason why we couldn't review 20 of those or 50 of those or 10 of those, as long as it wasn't a cumbersome application process. But that was another way to, because in essence, that's what the Teacher of the Year is.
Well, that's what I was saying, mirroring them.
It's the same thing. So
why didn't the committee give that option to the board? That sounds like a great idea.
Part of the dilemma is the functions of teachers within the district differ significantly, and so what teacher A may do is it's hard to compare to what teacher B may do, because they work, some work with elementary kids, some work with high school kids, and so at the time we didn't come up with a process as we think through. This is a state law, so we assume that it's going to continue to be a state law. And so as we continue to refine our process, we can certainly take additional time over the course of this year to kind of attack issues like that, and as a board, come up with some solutions if we can find them. We thought this was a good first start, after our first year of merit. This was a good kind of second step in merit, and I think your Teacher of the Year would be a worthy addition to this as well.
So just to finish, Mr. O'Connor, we did discuss it, and to Dr. Matthews' point, at this time, we're trying to put something in place because the school year has already started, and we agreed that at least this was something that we could do that was specific, measurable, actionable. It was a smart thing to do. We just haven't figured out yet, how do I measure our current Teacher of the Year, Mrs. Rice, who's a first grade elementary teacher in Village Oaks, to Mrs. North, who is the art teacher at Deerfield, who interacts with 500 kids every year, right, versus
every week.
Versus an IB biology teacher at the high school who has a very different. We just haven't figured it out yet.
So it's a process thing more than anything.
Perhaps we should start the process sooner, so we're not jammed like this in the future.
I think we were also trying to keep it quantitative and measurable. So once we got into the nomination process and it became subjective, and I think for our next step here, we wanted to do something more quantitative, and that's why when it was Tom's idea too about incorporating the National Board Certification. So that seemed like a perfect way to address the law, which includes job accomplishments. So that's just a perfect way to address that.
And we're trying to figure out, just to finish that, who would review that? Right. Not to pull back the curtain too much, but the executive committee of the NEF made. We're reading these applications and trying to decide to the best of our ability who was the most worthy. Who makes those decisions? We're working on it. But then, Mr. O'Connor, I thought, at least knowing we went from 200 to 300,
it's good. It's good. Just trying to get more than T-shirt, FICA, and something else. That's all.
I would also,
since we have the money. I
would also have a concern about how much money we allocate to the judgment of an outside organization as a public school district. So we're taking the NEF's judgment on who our best teachers are, and we're taking public money to pay that. So that was another kind of complication to that conversation.
Right, and how you figure that out.
That's an easy fix. The assistant superintendent of HR becomes connected with that, so it's another member of the committee. And then it's a joint thing, just like the NEF. Dr. Matthews sits on NEF board meetings, discusses things. You just create that connection, and all of a sudden the district's got some vested interest in it.
You're gonna
It's
have
an
a
HR
responsibility
function.
at the end of the day. Yes, Mr.
You
Cook?
know, I like the idea of rewarding, some reward for peer recommendations, which that is the mechanism that we have in place at this time. So I like that. I also like the idea, it does look like that we are going to exceed projections on student enrollment, so we're going to have some extra money, so let's put it forward. If others would rather wait to see how that's going to impact the fund balance, then okay, but I right now I don't see an issue with that.
I'm just trying to get your 14% one
I appreciate
to a 3.
that.
I'm
I
doing everything
appreciate
I can, Dr. Matthews.
Yeah, and
I just would feel better if I shared this, and maybe I'm stating the obvious, but as part of this committee, I've spent a lot of time talking to teachers and trying to get their input, and without exception, if all the teachers that I spoke with would agree on something, it would be to the effect of, no, I'm okay if you guys keep your merit pay and hire 2 more counselors for 2 more of our buildings. Or I think we still need classroom size shrunk in building X. I was blown away by the selfless nature as it related to our people in public education that were less interested in getting more money and more interested in providing a better learning environment for the kids.
And when Dr. Matthews asked his assistant assistant superintendents, what we've heard, to a person, the teachers said, merit doesn't drive us to do anything.
And
that's what, you asked the question, so I want to give you an answer.
May I add a thought too? So earlier this month, Darby Hoppenstedt presented to the board about MTSS and how we're working to develop systems for both academics and behavior in the district. I attended 2 of her professional development sessions for the Novi Meadows staff earlier this week. And the basic premise of MTSS is it's a system of our teachers all working together to support learning for all of our students. And I think the strength of our merit program this past year was it is supporting and recognizing the work of all of our teachers working collectively and collaboratively to promote learning for all of our students. And our data clearly recognizes that. Mm-hmm. So I don't think we want to lose sight of that.
Yeah, value in that. Thank you. Mr. O'Connor.
I want to follow up on Mr. Smith's comments. If that's the case in the research you did, I think we should remember that during contract negotiations.
I understand.
May I add a point of clarification as well?
Yes.
When asked what would the cost of retirement in FICA be, I would just want to be clear that $100,000 is a round figure based on the most conservative assumption that everybody eligible for merit would be at the highest retirement rate. And so in truth, that would be about 47%, which would equate to about a $94,000 price tag for retirement in FICA. But again, that's based on if we were to assume that everyone was at the highest retirement rate.
Okay. Thank you.
the bookkeeper comes out.
I appreciate the clarification.
So if what I heard is that we could implement this, and I would ask the board to provide clarification at our next meeting if they want to include the teacher of the year piece in that, and we could begin to communicate out to the NEF or the teacher group and the administrative group what our current or our 18-19 policy will be on merit, and then if there's an additional kind of addendum to that, we could include that after our next meeting on October 4th. That came up tonight, so instead of forcing the board to make kind of a final decision on that, I'd ask you to kind of think through that, and then next week you can give us some final feedback on that.
Okay, Mr. O'Connor.
I think the other point of clarification is, do we want to spend $400,000 instead of $300,000?
Yep.
Okay. do we need to weigh in on that now?
Nope, not now. We can do that next week too.
Okay, so the question came up with Dr. Matthews. Last year, we didn't actually formally vote to approve the merit pay. We just had the discussion because it's not something that is actionable.
It's not a negotiable item. So.
Right. So is the board comfortable not taking a formal action on this, or would you prefer to formally vote once the merit pay plan is in place?
No, if I
Last
can.
year, they just implemented it. We didn't.
Why couldn't we vote on it?
We can vote.
You can't.
We just,
You can't. We just didn't.
We didn't last year.
Oh, okay.
We just
All
didn't
right.
last year. You can vote on it. We just didn't last year.
So for point of clarification, since the process last year was basically we came up with we had the discussion, we came up with a plan. The district informed us. I mean, we had full discussion about it. We just didn't have a formal vote on it.
Sure, I think we should have a formal vote.
Okay, that's the pleasure of the board.
Okay. So we'll make a recommendation to the board next week.
Okay. All right, so we are to our second opportunity for comments from the audience. People have trickled in, so we do have an audience. If there's anyone that would like to address the board, if you could please fill out the green card if you didn't already. And shows indicating that you did. Will you identify yourself and where you're from?
Use this in a while.
And we will expect that your comments would be 5 minutes or less. And welcome. Thank you.
Well, great. Thanks. My name is Punitha Dani, Superintendent Matthews, President Murphy, Board of Trustees. Thanks for the opportunity to come and speak in front of you today. I really am grateful and wanted to commend you about the conversation that you had about merit pay. I know it's something that the board has been thinking about for quite some time. Even back in 2014, this conversation was sort of in circulation, and the idea of rewarding our teachers and recognizing its excellence is really important. I had the opportunity when I was working at the district in Fort Worth to be in charge of a $5 million merit pay program, which in turn yielded sort of a grant from the federal government of $40 million. And so I believe in the power of using your funds to reward and recognize teachers. But I just wanted to really iterate and talk about some of the things that you all articulated on this table about how important it is to be very clear on your strategic intent about what you are aligning that money around. So what those rewards actually deliver to teachers will send a loud and clear message about what you value. So the addition of thinking about paying for national board certification is terrific. That's a very rigorous bar of development, and it sends a message that we both value our teachers for continuing their own learning and the impact that it will have around our students. The program that I designed in Fort Worth was based on a premise that I'd offered to you about teaching being a team sport. And we really held that idea that teachers work best. Best teaching for kids actually happens when teachers are working together. And so the model that we incorporated rewarded teachers, some at the whole school level, but also was intentional in thinking about how to facilitate collaboration. So whether it was teams of teachers across a grade or across a content area working together with some specific behaviors, or even non-tested content teachers working in collaboration with teachers, there were variations of that award. And so my only caution to you is to really think about the message that you send to your teachers. And as being part of the NEF, I think the Teacher of the Year program is terrific, but I'm not sure that it has enough substance in terms of really sending a message about what the district values in terms of how that reward, beyond we have so many great teachers. All of the teachers are worthy of that reward. And I think that's part of the struggle that NEF has. But if you would bring back to this table a consideration of what are those principles that you think are guiding this board around your desire around merit pay as you think about taking this decision forward and making a vote on it to the community and to the teachers in our district. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to address the board about anything within our jurisdiction? All right. Seeing no one approach the board, I will turn to you, Dr. Matthews, for the superintendent's report.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. I'd just like to remind our community that tomorrow is homecoming, and so we have our parade starting on Taft Road at 5 p.m. So if you're in the area, don't try to come down Taft Road at 5 p.m. or down 11 Mile or 10 Mile. And we also have our football game tomorrow night, and then the homecoming dance on Saturday. Homecoming is a great opportunity for us as a community to reflect on the values that we hold as a school district and what draws us together as a community. And so it's an opportune time for not only for us to celebrate with our students at the high school, but also for us to celebrate as a community about the wonderful things that make us a community. And I would argue that the school district is one of the things that makes Novi a wonderful community to be a part of. And that's my report for this evening.
Fantastic. Thank you. Mr. O'Connor?
Do we have a status on what we're doing with student growth model?
Yeah, in the weekly a couple of weeks ago, I indicated that we are working on that, and so I will provide some additional information to the board based on what we believe the state has identified for us to do. So I'll give that information to the board.
All right. Thank you. Our administrative reports. Ms. Minnick.
Thank you. This evening I just have some very brief updates for you. Our annual financial audit continues this week, and our business office staff continues to provide the data that they need and the information they're looking for, and all is going well in that regard. The State of Michigan bus inspections have concluded since my last report. That final report of the inspections has not been yet made available, but my understanding is that 100% of our buses passed inspection with no exceptions. So we have 2 mechanics that take care of our fleet of 39 buses, Matt Nowicki and Tom Hurlbert, and this is a remarkable result. So I'd like to thank them for their outstanding care of our fleet to improve the longevity and the safe operation of our buses. But once we have that final report, we will share out more fully on that process and those outcomes. In the area of food service, a focus this year is to increase awareness of our breakfast program. Studies show that students who eat breakfast perform better in school, and students eligible for free or reduced price lunches are also eligible for free or reduced price breakfasts. Breakfast is available to all students at every school and includes a grain and protein-based entree, 2 fruit sides, and a choice of skim milk, chocolate, or white milk. Some entree selections include turkey, bacon, egg, and cheese breakfast sandwiches, breakfast parfaits, and freshly baked cinnamon rolls. In our maintenance and operations department, I want to welcome our new HVAC technician, Chris Jordan, who began work with us this week, and we continue to seek a second HVAC. Continue to seek to fill a second HVAC technician position. And that's all I have for you this evening.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Kinzer.
I wanted to share with you just a little summary of our first Mentee Monday professional development session for our first-year teachers to both the profession and Novi. We did a session on eye observation. Jeff Dinkelman, Katie Dinkelman, and Dave Asher joined me in presenting to our new teachers. It was a very full hour of professional development. We do the first session for our secondary teachers and then the second session for our elementary teachers. Collected feedback at the end, and the feedback was they need more. So our October session will also be eye observation based. It will be focusing specifically on the observation part of the process. And for that, Jen Mikos and Annie Combe will join me, along with a teacher from Parkview and a teacher from the middle school. Thank you.
Thank you.
Monday night, excited to say that our student-led community dialogue around mental health and well-being occurs. Made that available to community members last week in less than 24 hours at Phil, which is outstanding. And hopefully we'll continue to drive interest in that piece of it. But it really is a testament to our commitment of authentic student voice. Our kids will be leading the evening and the dialogue and the conversation, sharing with the community what their challenges are and what their joys are, and then breaking out into groups and leading that dialogue. So really proud of the kids that are doing it, proud to be part of a community school district that supports the children in hearing what they have to say, and more important, listening.
Thank you. Next is the opportunity for board communication. This is for board members to share things that they've been involved in that they feel would have value for other board members to know or to share, or committees. But I don't think we've had any committee meetings between now and the last meeting. No? Anybody? Okay. Well, then I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Cook.
Support.
Supported by Mr. Smith. All those in favor, will you please say aye.
Aye.
Motion, opposed? Motion carries 7-0. Thanks for being with us this evening.